They said she killed 7 children. They said her father's hands were soaked in blood. And tonight, at the Ashford Garden Party, they're going to destroy what's left of her. Lena Whitaker stands in a gilded prison, surrounded by silk and venom, waiting for the moment they finally tear her apart. But when a ruthless duke steps into the firelight with eyes like a winter storm, everything changes. This is the story of a woman they buried alive, and the storm that brought her back. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to know who's riding this storm with me. The lanterns swayed in the evening breeze like pendulums counting down to execution. Lena Whitaker stood at the edge of the Ashford estate gardens, her gloved hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone numb. Around her, the cream of Greycrest society moved in elegant circles, women in gowns that whispered against marble pathways, men in tailored coats laughing too loudly over crystal glasses. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive wine, but underneath it all was something sharper, something rotten. She'd known it was a mistake to come. She'd known it the moment the invitation arrived 3 weeks ago, cream parchment with gold lettering that felt like a taunt. Lady Constance Ashford requests the pleasure of your company. Pleasure. As if Lena had known pleasure in 3 years. But her aunt had insisted. You can't hide forever, Aunt Miriam had said, adjusting Lena's collar with hands that trembled just slightly. People need to see you're not what they think you are. What they think I am, Lena had wanted to say. A murderer. A monster. The daughter of a disgraced physician who let 7 children die screaming in their beds. She'd come anyway. Because some part of her, the part that hadn't yet learned to stop hoping, believed that maybe, just maybe, if she stood tall enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, they might forget. They might let her breathe. That part of her was a fool. Is that her? The whisper cut through the music like a blade. Lena didn't turn. She'd learned not to turn. It is. I can't believe she had the audacity. After what her father did. Those poor children. My cousin's boy was one of them, only 6 years old. 6. The voices circled closer, a tightening noose of silk and judgment. Lena's vision began to narrow at the edges, the way it always did when the panic came. Her body knew before her mind did, knew that danger was close, that she needed to disappear, to fold into herself until she was small enough that they couldn't see her anymore. Her fingers went cold, her breath caught. Not here, not now. Miss Whitaker? The voice was smooth, feminine, and absolutely lethal. Lena forced her eyes up. Lady Constance Ashford stood before her, resplendent in emerald silk, her dark hair swept into an elaborate arrangement that must have taken her maid hours. She was beautiful in the way a viper was beautiful, all sleek lines and perfect symmetry, right up until the moment she struck. Lady Ashford, Lena's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Small victories. I'm so glad you could join us tonight. Constance's smile didn't reach her eyes. Behind her, a small crowd had begun to gather. Women Lena vaguely recognized from before, from the time when her father was still alive and she'd been invited to these things as a matter of course. Their faces were familiar, but their expressions had changed. Curious, hungry. Thank you for the invitation, Lena managed. Of course, we're all very forgiving here. Constance tilted her head, the lantern light catching the emeralds at her throat. Though I must say it takes courage to show your face in polite society after everything that happened. The garden seemed to grow quieter. Conversations died. Even the string quartet in the corner faltered for half a measure before picking up again. Lena's hands tightened. My father was a good man. Was he? Constance's eyebrows lifted delicately. That's not what the inquiry found, is it? 7 children dead from tainted medicine. Medicine he prepared. Medicine he distributed. She paused, letting each word land like a stone. Medicine that came from his practice. The practice you assisted in. Lena's throat closed. The edges of her vision were sparking now, little bursts of white light that meant she was losing time. You weren't involved, but you were there, weren't you? Grinding the compounds, measuring the doses. Constance stepped closer, and Lena could smell her perfume, roses and something darker, like crushed laurel. Tell me, Miss Whitaker, when you gave those parents the medicine that killed their children, did you know? Or were you simply too incompetent to notice? The world tilted. Lena's body made the decision her mind couldn't. Her knees began to buckle, her vision tunneling to a pinpoint of light. She was going under, falling into the dark place where she couldn't be hurt, couldn't feel, couldn't... That's enough. The voice was male, low, and carried the kind of authority that made the entire garden freeze. Through the haze, Lena saw him. He was tall, taller than any man in the immediate circle, with shoulders that filled out his black coat like he'd been built for violence and then taught to wear it elegantly. His hair was dark, pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and sharp edges, the kind of face that didn't smile easily, or often, but it was his eyes that cut through Lena's panic like a knife through fog. Gray, storm gray, and fixed on Lady Ashford with an intensity that made the noblewoman take an involuntary step backward. "Your Grace," Constance breathed. "Your Grace." Duke! Lena's mind scrambled for the connection. Duke, Greycrest. There was only one Duke in Greycrest, and he was Rowan Blackmore, someone whispered. Oh no. The Duke of Blackmore was a name spoken in drawing rooms with a mixture of fascination and fear. He'd inherited the title at 19 after his father died in what the official reports called a hunting accident, though rumors insisted it was murder. He'd spent the next decade consolidating power, crushing rivals, and generally behaving like a man who'd been raised by wolves and taught manners as an afterthought. He didn't attend social gatherings. He didn't dance. He didn't marry. And he absolutely didn't intervene in public shamings at garden parties. "Your Grace," Constance said again, recovering her composure with visible effort. "What a surprise. I didn't realize you were saying something about Miss Whitaker." Rowan's gaze hadn't moved from Constance's face. "Something about murder, if I heard correctly." "I was simply accusing her. In public, without trial, without evidence, without anything resembling basic human decency." His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. It made the words hit harder. "Did I miss anything?" Constance's face flushed. The inquiry cleared her of direct involvement, but everyone knows, Rowan repeated the words slowly as if tasting them. "Tell me, Lady Ashford, what does everyone know, specifically?" "The children died from her father's medicine, and the inquiry found that the medicine had been tampered with by someone outside the practice, which means someone murdered those children and framed Dr. Whitaker for it." He paused. "Unless you have evidence to the contrary." The silence was deafening. Constance's mouth opened, closed. "No, but then perhaps you should keep your accusations to yourself until you do." Rowan finally looked away from Constance, his gaze dropping to Lena. "Miss Whitaker, walk with me." It wasn't a request. Lena's body was still screaming at her to run, to hide, to disappear into the hedgerows and never come back. But something in those storm gray eyes held her in place. Something that wasn't pity, wasn't kindness, but also wasn't cruelty. Challenge, maybe, or recognition. She forced her legs to move. Rowan offered his arm, a gesture so archaic and formal it felt like theater, and Lena took it because the alternative was collapsing in front of 200 people who already thought she was a murderer. His arm was solid beneath her fingers. Steady. They walked. Behind them, the garden erupted into whispers. Rowan didn't speak until they'd reached the far edge of the estate, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild grass and the real night began. The music was a distant hum now, the lanterns barely visible through the trees. He stopped near a stone bench, releasing her arm. Lena's knees gave out. She sat hard, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that she couldn't control. "You're having a panic attack," Rowan said. Not a question, an observation. Lena managed a jerky nod. Breathe slower. Count to 4 on the inhale. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. She wanted to snap at him. I know how breathing works. But she didn't have the air for it. Instead, she followed the instructions, forcing her lungs to obey even as her body insisted she was dying. 4 in. 4 hold. 4 out. Again. Again. Slowly, painfully, the world came back into focus. Rowan had stepped away, giving her space. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, looking out at the darkness like he was guarding her from it. "Why did you do that?" Lena's voice was hoarse. Do what? Defend me. You don't know me. I know enough. You know my name and my scandal. That's not enough. Rowan turned. In the dim light, his face was all shadows and sharp lines. I know your father was a brilliant physician who dedicated his life to treating the poor. I know he died 3 months after the inquiry cleared him of wrongdoing because he couldn't live with the fact that children died under his care, even though he didn't kill them. And I know that for 3 years you've been carrying his guilt like it belongs to you. He paused. That's enough. Lena stared at him. How do you know any of that? I make it my business to know things. Why? Because knowledge is power, Miss Whitaker, and power is the only thing that matters in this world. It should have sounded cynical, cold, but there was something else in his voice, something that sounded almost like conviction. You still haven't answered my question, Lena said. Why help me? Rowan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Because I hate bullies, and because he hesitated, which seemed so unlike him that Lena leaned forward despite herself. Because I think your father was murdered too, just slower. By people like Constance Ashford, who couldn't stand the idea that a man from the frontier could be better at his job than their expensive city physicians. The words hung in the air between them. You think someone killed him, Lena said slowly. I think someone destroyed him, which amounts to the same thing. The inquiry said the medicine was tampered with. They never found who did it. No, they didn't. Rowan's jaw tightened, which is convenient for whoever actually committed the crime. Lena's mind was racing now, the panic fading into something sharper. You think it was deliberate, not just the tampering, the whole thing. I think your father had enemies. I think one of them saw an opportunity and took it, and I think whoever did it is still out there, comfortable and untouched, while you take the blame. Why are you telling me this? Rowan crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, crouching so they were eye level. Up close, she could see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the flecks of darker gray in his irises, the way his mouth was set in a hard line. Because I want to hire you, he said. Lena blinked. What? I have a problem. You have skills. We can help each other. I don't understand. I study storms, Miss Whitaker, weather patterns, atmospheric phenomena. I have instruments, records, data going back 15 years, but I need someone who understands medicine, chemistry, the way compounds interact under different conditions. Someone who can look at my father's research and tell me if what I'm seeing is real or if I'm chasing ghosts. Your father? He died in a storm, or so they tell me. But the reports don't add up. The weather patterns don't match the official story. I think someone killed him and made it look like an accident. His eyes were locked on hers. I need proof. And I think your father's records might hold the key. Lena's breath caught. My father's records were seized by the inquiry. Most of them, but I'm betting you kept copies. The important ones. The ones that mattered. He was right. She had. Hidden in the false bottom of a trunk in her aunt's attic were 3 journals filled with her father's meticulous notes on compounds, reactions, weather effects on medicinal plants. She'd saved them because burning them felt like erasing him completely. Even if I did, Lena said carefully, why would I help you? You're a stranger, a duke. You could destroy me with a word. I could, but I won't. Rowan stood, offering his hand. Work with me. Help me prove what happened to my father. And in return, I'll help you find out who really killed those children, who framed your father, who took everything from you. Lena looked at his outstretched hand. This was insane. He was insane. Investigating a duke's death? Digging into a closed case? She'd be lucky if she didn't end up in prison. Or worse. But for 3 years she'd been drowning. For 3 years she had lived in the shadow of a crime she didn't commit, carrying guilt that didn't belong to her, watching her life shrink smaller and smaller until she could barely breathe. And here was a man, a dangerous, powerful, unpredictable man, offering her a way out, or at least a way forward. What exactly would this involve? Lena asked. Field work. We'd travel to the locations where the deaths occurred, study the storm patterns, cross-reference your father's medicinal records with atmospheric conditions, look for connections. That could take months. It will take months, possibly a year. And you expect me to just leave? Travel with you? Unchaperoned? Rowan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Your reputation is already ruined, Miss Whitaker. What do you have to lose? Everything, Lena thought. And nothing. She took his hand. His grip was warm, solid, and for the first time in 3 years, Lena felt like she was standing on solid ground. I'll need access to my father's journals, she said, and I'll need your word that whatever we find, you'll help me clear his name. You have it. And if we find nothing, if the deaths were just tragic accidents? Rowan's expression darkened. Then we'll know. But I don't believe in accidents, Miss Whitaker. Not in storms, not in death. Someone always benefits. We just have to find out who. What? They returned to the garden party separately. Rowan first, striding back into the light like a king returning to his court, and Lena 10 minutes later, her heart still hammering but her spine straight. The whispers started immediately. Did you see the Duke of Blackmore with her? Lena ignored them. For the first time in 3 years, she had something they didn't. Purpose. She found her aunt near the dessert table, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. We're leaving, Lena said quietly. Aunt Miriam's eyes widened. What happened? Did someone? No, nothing happened, but we're leaving. Now. Something in Lena's voice must have convinced her, because Miriam set down her glass without argument and gathered her shawl. As they walked toward the gates, Lena caught one last glimpse of Rowan. He was standing near the fountain, surrounded by admirers and sycophants, but his gaze was on her. He inclined his head slightly. A promise, an acknowledgement. Lena turned away and walked into the night, feeling the weight of 3 years begin, just barely, to lift. The next morning, a messenger arrived at Aunt Miriam's townhouse with a sealed letter. Lena opened it alone in her room, her hands shaking. Miss Whitaker, meet me at Blackmore Hall tomorrow at noon. Bring your father's journals. Bring warm clothes and sturdy boots. We have work to do. And Miss Whitaker, don't close your eyes, not anymore. The world is harsh, but hiding from it won't save you. The only way out is through R. Blackmore. Lena read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where she kept her father's watch. Don't close your eyes. She'd spent 3 years trying to disappear, trying to make herself small enough that the world would forget she existed. But Rowan Blackmore wasn't asking her to disappear. He was asking her to fight. And for the first time since her father died, Lena thought maybe, just maybe, she could. She pulled the trunk from the attic that night, her hand steady as she lifted the false bottom and removed her father's journals. 3 leather-bound books, filled with his careful handwriting, his observations, his life's work. I'm sorry, Papa, she whispered to the empty room. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but maybe I can finish what you started. The journals felt heavy in her hands, heavy with memory, with loss, with possibility. Tomorrow, she would go to Blackmore Hall. Tomorrow she would stop running, and whatever came next, storms, truth, danger, or worse, she would face it with her eyes wide open. Because Rowan Blackmore was right about one thing, hiding wouldn't save her. The only way out was through. The road to Blackmore Hall cut through country that looked like it had been carved by an angry god, all jagged cliffs and windswept moors, with trees bent permanently sideways from decades of relentless gales. Lena sat in the hired coach, her father's journals wrapped in oilcloth on her lap, and watched civilization fall away with every mile. Aunt Miriam hadn't asked questions. She'd simply pressed a purse of coins into Lena's hands that morning and said, "Come back alive. That's all I ask." The words had felt like a blessing and a curse wrapped together. The coach lurched over a rut in the road, and Lena's stomach lurched with it. She'd barely slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Constance Ashford's face, heard the whispers, felt the weight of 1,000 judging stares pressing down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. But she'd also heard Rowan's voice. Don't close your eyes. So she hadn't. She'd stayed awake, watching the dawn break over the rooftops of Greycrest, feeling something shift inside her chest. Fear, yes, but also something harder, something that felt almost like anger. Good. She could use anger. The coach crested a hill, and Blackmore Hall came into view. It wasn't a pretty building, no elegant columns or manicured gardens here. Instead, the hall sprawled across the landscape like a fortress, all gray stone and sharp angles, built to withstand storms rather than impress guests. Towers jutted up at irregular intervals, and the windows were narrow, defensive. It looked like the kind of place where secrets went to hide, or where they went to be buried. The coach pulled into the courtyard, and before Lena could gather her courage, the door swung open. Rowan stood there, dressed for work in plain dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. No coat, no cravat. He looked younger somehow, less like a duke and more like a man who'd grown up doing hard labor. "Miss Whitaker." He offered his hand to help her down. "Punctual. I appreciate that." Lena took his hand, her boots hitting the cobblestones with a solid thud. "I wasn't sure you were serious." "I'm always serious." He released her hand and gestured toward the hall. "Breakfast first, then we start." "Start what exactly?" "Training." That stopped her. "Training for what?" Rowan's expression didn't change, but his eyes held something that might have been amusement. "You're going into the field with me, Miss Whitaker. Storm chasing isn't a drawing room activity. If you can't keep up, you'll die. So we train." "I thought you needed me for my father's journals." "I do. I also need you alive to read them." He turned and headed toward the hall. "Come on, Mrs. Graves has made eggs." Lena stood in the courtyard for a moment, her heart hammering before she followed him inside. The interior of Blackmore Hall was as austere as the exterior. High ceilings, stone floors, minimal furniture. But it was clean, and there was a fire roaring in the hearth of what appeared to be a study, and the smell of breakfast made Lena's stomach clench with sudden, sharp hunger. A stern-faced woman in her 50s appeared from a side door carrying a tray. "So you're the one," she said, looking Lena up and down with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock. "Skinny, but you've got spine. I can see it." "Mrs. Graves is my housekeeper and the only person in this house allowed to insult me," Rowan said, settling into a chair at a scarred wooden table. "Mrs. Graves, this is Miss Lena Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker's daughter." Mrs. Graves set the tray down with more force than necessary. "Your father once saved my nephew's life when the fancy physicians said it was hopeless. Pneumonia. They wanted to bleed him. Your father gave him willow bark and kept him warm, and talked my sister through the fever like he had all the time in the world." Her mouth tightened. What they said about him after was a damned lie. The words hit Lena like a fist to the chest. She'd gotten used to accusations, to whispers, to cold shoulders. Kindness was somehow harder to bear. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Graves nodded sharply. "Eat. You're going to need your strength if you're working with this one." She shot Rowan a look that was equal parts exasperation and affection. "He drives himself like a demon and expects everyone else to keep pace." "I expect competence," Rowan corrected. "There's a difference." "There's also such a thing as sleep, Your Grace, though you wouldn't know it." Rowan ignored her, turning his attention to Lena. "Did you bring the journals?" Lena unwrapped the oilcloth and set the 3 leather-bound books on the table. They looked small and fragile in the morning light, but Rowan's eyes lit up like she'd just handed him a treasure map. He reached for the top one, then stopped, his fingers hovering over the cover. "May I?" It was such a small thing, asking permission, but it made something in Lena's chest ease. "Yes." Rowan opened the journal carefully, his eyes scanning the pages with an intensity that suggested he was reading more than just words. His finger traced down a column of notes, stopped, moved back up. "Your father was tracking atmospheric pressure," he said slowly. "Look. Here." He's noting the barometric readings alongside the effectiveness of certain compounds. Lena leaned closer. Her father's handwriting was as familiar as her own, small, precise, with occasional sketches in the margins. He believed weather affected how medicines worked, especially plant-based treatments. He said the same dose could heal or harm depending on temperature, humidity, air pressure. Did he test it? He tried, but he needed more data, more observations. He couldn't be everywhere at once. Lena's throat tightened. After the children died, the inquiry said his theory was nonsense, that he was making excuses. Rowan's jaw clenched. "It's not nonsense, it's brilliant." He flipped through more pages, his excitement building. "Do you see this? He's documented 7 years of observations. Crop failures, livestock deaths, human illnesses, all cross-referenced with weather patterns. He looked up, his gray eyes fierce. This is exactly what I need. For what? To prove my father didn't die in a random storm. Rowan stood, began pacing. 3 years ago, my father went to inspect the northern estates during what was supposed to be mild weather. The official report says a freak storm came out of nowhere. Lightning, hail, wind strong enough to uproot trees. His horse threw him. He hit his head, dead before anyone found him. But you don't believe that. I believe the storm happened. What I don't believe is that it was natural. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. I've been tracking weather patterns for 15 years, Miss Whitaker. I have instruments all over this estate. Barometers, wind gauges, rain measures. I record everything. And I'm telling you, the conditions that day didn't match the outcome. Not even close. Lena frowned. Storms can be unpredictable. Not that unpredictable. Not in that location. Not with those wind patterns. His hands clenched. Someone created that storm. Or manipulated it. And I think your father's research might tell me how. The words hung in the air, too large and too strange to process fully. You think someone can control the weather? Lena said slowly. I think someone can influence it, under the right conditions, with the right knowledge. He gestured at the journals. Your father was studying how atmospheric changes affect chemical compounds. What if someone reversed that? What if they found compounds that could affect the atmosphere? It sounded insane. It sounded like the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. But Lena had spent 3 years living in the aftermath of an impossible crime. 7 children dead from medicine that should have been safe. An inquiry that found tampering but no culprit. A brilliant physician destroyed by an enemy who'd never been caught. If someone could poison medicine and disappear without a trace, why couldn't they manipulate a storm? What do you need me to do? Lena asked. Rowan's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his face. Learn to survive in the field. We're going to the sites where my father's instruments recorded anomalies. Remote locations, harsh terrain. If you can't handle the physical demands, this partnership ends before it begins. I'm stronger than I look. Prove it. The training started that afternoon. Rowan led Lena to the back of the estate, where the manicured grounds gave way to wild moorland. The wind was brutal, carrying the smell of rain and something sharper, ozone maybe, or just the scent of a land that had never been tamed. First lesson, Rowan said, his voice carrying over the wind. When a storm comes, you don't run from it. You can't outrun weather, Miss Whitaker. It's faster than you, stronger than you, and it doesn't care if you live or die. So you learn to read it, to move with it, to find the safe spaces inside the chaos. And how exactly do I do that? He pointed toward the horizon, where dark clouds were beginning to gather. We wait for that storm to hit, and then we walk through it. Lena stared at him. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't. He looked like a man who'd stared down death so many times it no longer scared him. This is insane, Lena said. This is necessary. In the field, we won't have the luxury of shelter. We'll be taking readings, collecting samples, observing patterns in real time. If you panic every time the wind picks up, you're useless to me. The words stung, but they were also true. Lena thought about the garden party, about the way her body had betrayed her, shutting down when she needed to stay present, about 3 years of hiding, of making herself small, of closing her eyes against a world that wanted to destroy her. Fine, she said. Teach me. The storm rolled in an hour later. It started with rain, cold, driving sheets that soaked through Lena's cloak in seconds. Then the wind picked up, strong enough to make her stagger. Thunder cracked overhead, so close she felt it in her bones. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to find shelter, to hide. But Rowan was standing in the middle of the moor like the storm was nothing more than a mild inconvenience, his hair plastered to his skull, his shirt clinging to his frame. He was watching her. Don't close your eyes. Lena forced herself to move forward. One step, another. The wind tried to shove her sideways, and she planted her feet, leaned into it. Good, Rowan called over the roar of the storm. Now tell me what you see. Rain, Lena shouted back. Wind, lightning. Look closer. Where's the lightning striking? She squinted through the rain, trying to focus. The lightning was hitting the same area repeatedly, a cluster of rocks about 50 yards to their left. "The rocks," she called. "Why?" "I don't—" She stopped. Thought. "Higher elevation. Metal deposits?" "Exactly. Which means that area is dangerous. We avoid it. Where's the wind coming from?" Lena turned, feeling the direction. "Northwest. Which means if we need shelter, we move southeast, where the wind will be blocked." Rowan's grin was brief but genuine. "You're learning." They stayed in the storm for another hour. Rowan taught her to read the clouds, to estimate wind speed by how the grass bent, to find stable ground by watching where water pooled. By the time the rain finally eased, Lena was soaked, exhausted, and shaking with cold. But she'd done it. She'd stood in the storm and kept her eyes open. "Not bad for a first attempt," Rowan said as they trudged back toward the hall. "Tomorrow we'll work on navigation. After that, climbing." "Climbing?" "The best observation points are usually at elevation. You'll need to scale cliffs, Miss Whitaker, steep ones." Lena's legs were already screaming. The thought of climbing made her want to weep, but she didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "Fine. What time do we start?" Rowan's expression softened, just for a moment. "Dawn. Get some sleep. And Miss Whitaker?" "Yes?" "You did well today." The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of physical punishment and incremental progress. Rowan drove her relentlessly, teaching her to climb, to navigate by stars, to identify edible plants in dangerous terrain. Every morning, Lena woke with new bruises. Every night, she collapsed into bed too tired to dream. But she also grew stronger. Her hands, once soft and suited only for grinding medicinal compounds, developed calluses. Her legs learned to navigate steep inclines without trembling. Her lungs adapted to thin air and cold wind. And slowly, carefully, she began to trust that her body wouldn't betray her when she needed it most. They also worked on the journals. Every evening after the physical training ended, Rowan and Lena would sit in the study, cross-referencing her father's notes with Rowan's weather records. They built timelines, mapped patterns, looked for connections, and they found them. "Look at this," Rowan said one night, spreading out a series of charts on the table. "Your father documented a series of unusual plant die-offs in the Eastern Valley. 3 separate incidents over 2 years, each one preceded by abnormal atmospheric pressure and followed by human illnesses." Lena leaned closer, studying her father's handwriting. "He thought the pressure changes were affecting the plant's chemical composition, making them toxic. And I have records of deliberate atmospheric manipulation in that exact area." Rowan tapped a chart. Someone was testing, trying different compounds, different delivery methods, seeing what worked. "Testing for what?" "For murder." Rowan's voice was flat. "Think about it. If you can create localized atmospheric changes strong enough to alter plant chemistry, you can poison an entire region without anyone knowing you were there. No evidence, no weapon. Just bad weather and tragic accidents." Lena's blood ran cold. "The children. The medicine was made from plants my father harvested himself." "From where?" "The Eastern Valley." Their eyes met across the table. "Someone poisoned the land," Lena whispered. "They knew my father would harvest there. They knew the plants would be toxic. And when the children died, he'd take the blame." "Which means this wasn't random." Rowan's jaw clenched. "This was targeted, deliberate. Someone wanted your father destroyed." "But why?" "Because he knew too much. Because his research was getting too close to something dangerous." Rowan stood, began pacing. "We need to go to the valley, see if there's any evidence left. Take samples. Compare them to your father's notes. The valley is 3 days' ride from here, through rough country." "I know." "And if we find evidence, then what? No one will believe us. I'm the disgraced daughter of a dead physician, and you're—" She stopped. "A duke with a reputation for being unstable," Rowan finished. "I know, but we're not trying to convince everyone, Miss Whitaker. We're trying to find the truth, and once we have it, we'll find the one person who can't afford to ignore us." "Who?" "Whoever's behind this. Because if they're still out there, still testing, still killing, they'll come for us too." The words should have terrified her. Maybe 3 weeks ago, they would have. But now, standing in Rowan's study with her father's journals spread between them and the truth finally within reach, Lena felt something else. Purpose. "When do we leave?" she asked. "2 days. I need to gather equipment, arrange for supplies." He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "This is your last chance to back out, Miss Whitaker. Once we start down this path, there's no returning to a quiet life. People will call you crazy, dangerous. They'll say I've corrupted you or you've corrupted me. Your reputation, what's left of it, will be destroyed completely." "My reputation was destroyed 3 years ago," Lena said quietly. "I have nothing left to lose." "You have your life." "What kind of life? Hiding in my aunt's house? Being spat on in the streets? Living with the weight of 7 dead children on my conscience for crimes I didn't commit?" She shook her head. "That's not living, that's just surviving. And I'm tired of surviving." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and extended his hand. "Partners?" Lena took it. His grip was warm, calloused, steady. "Partners." They left for the Eastern Valley 2 days later, just as the first autumn storms began to roll in from the coast. The journey was brutal. They rode through rain and mud, camping in the open when they couldn't find shelter, eating dried meat and hard bread that tasted like sawdust. Lena's entire body ached, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with Rowan, refusing to be the weak link. On the 3rd day, they reached the valley. It was beautiful in a desolate way, rolling hills covered in wild grasses, with a river cutting through the center like a silver ribbon. But there was something wrong about it, too. The grass was the wrong shade of green, the trees looked stunted, and the air had a metallic taste that made Lena's teeth ache. "Your father harvested here?" Rowan asked, dismounting. "Yes, he said the plants were stronger here, more potent." Lena slid from her horse, her legs nearly buckling. "He didn't know they were poisoned." They set up a temporary camp near the river and spent the next 2 days collecting samples. Soil, water, plants. Rowan took atmospheric readings while Lena carefully labeled and preserved everything in jars and vials. On the 2nd night, as they sat by the fire, Lena said, "I keep thinking about the parents, the ones who lost children. They trusted my father. They brought their sick babies to him, and he gave them medicine that killed them. How do you live with that? How did he?" "He didn't," Rowan said quietly. "That's the point. The guilt destroyed him even though he was innocent. Because he was a good man, and good men feel responsible for things beyond their control." "Were you close to your father?" Rowan was quiet for so long Lena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "No. He was a hard man. Distant. But he was brilliant. And he didn't deserve to die the way he did." He looked at her across the flames. "Neither did yours. Do you think we'll find who did this?" "I think we'll find the truth. What we do with it after that..." He shrugged. "That depends on how much we're willing to sacrifice." Before Lena could respond, a sound cut through the night. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast. Rowan was on his feet in an instant, his hand on the knife at his belt. "Extinguish the fire. Now!" Lena grabbed a pan of water and doused the flames, plunging them into darkness. Her heart hammered as the hoofbeats grew louder, closer. "Behind the rocks!" Rowan hissed. They scrambled for cover just as 6 riders burst into the clearing. In the moonlight, Lena could make out their faces. Young men, well-dressed, armed. And leading them was someone she recognized. Lord Edmund Thorne, Constance Ashford's cousin. A man her father had once refused to treat because he demanded special medicine for a minor ailment while truly sick children waited. "Search the area," Thorne called. The Duke was seen heading this direction with the murderer's daughter. "If they're collecting evidence, we burn it. All of it." Lena's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Rowan's expression was murderous. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "When I move, you run for the horses. Don't look back. Don't stop. Understand? I'm not leaving you. You run, or we both die. Choose." Before she could argue, Rowan stepped out from behind the rocks, his hands raised. "Thorne, I should have known you'd be involved." Thorne's horse reared. "Blackmore, you're trespassing on Ashford land. This is Crown land. Has been for 200 years, but I suppose facts have never been your strong suit. Clever words won't save you, or the girl." Thorne's eyes found Lena in the shadows. Come out, Miss Whitaker. Let's see if you're as brave as your murdered patient's parents. Lena's legs trembled, but she forced herself to stand, to step into the moonlight beside Rowan. Brave, Thorne said, his smile cold. Or stupid. Tell me, did the Duke promise to restore your reputation if you warmed his bed? Because that's all you're good for now. The words were designed to wound, and they did. But before Lena could respond, Rowan moved. He was fast. Faster than anyone in a nobleman's coat had a right to be. One moment he was standing still, the next he'd closed the distance to Thorne's horse, grabbed the man's boot, and yanked him from the saddle. Thorne hit the ground hard. His men shouted, reached for weapons. Run! Rowan snarled at Lena. This time she did. She ran for the horses, her lungs burning, her vision tunneling. Behind her, she heard steel on steel, men shouting, Rowan's voice cutting through the chaos with commands that sounded more like battlefield orders than drawing room threats. She reached her horse, grabbed the reins, hauled herself into the saddle, and then she stopped. Because she could hear Rowan fighting 6 men alone, and every instinct she'd learned over the past 3 weeks screamed that partners didn't run. Partners didn't leave each other to die. Lena wheeled her horse around. Rowan had 2 men down, but the others were circling, and Thorne was back on his feet with a sword drawn. Rowan's knife was good at close range, but against 4 armed men. Lena didn't think. She just spurred her horse forward, straight into the fight, screaming like a demon. The horse plowed into one of the riders, sending him sprawling. Lena swung the saddlebag like a weapon, catching another across the face. "What are you doing?" Rowan roared. "Saving my partner," Lena shouted back. For half a second their eyes met, and then Rowan grinned, fierce and wild and completely insane. Together they fought their way to his horse. Rowan vaulted into the saddle, reached down, and hauled Lena up behind him in one fluid motion. "Hold on," he said. They rode. Thorne's men gave chase, but Rowan knew the terrain, and they didn't. He led them through narrow passes and treacherous switchbacks, pushing the horse to its limits, until finally the pursuit fell away. They didn't stop until dawn, when the horse was stumbling with exhaustion and Lena's arms ached from holding on. Rowan dismounted near a stream, his breathing hard. Blood seeped through his shirt where someone's blade had caught him. "You're hurt," Lena said. "You should have run." But there was no anger in his voice, just something that sounded almost like wonder. "You could have gotten away clean." "I told you, I'm tired of running." Lena slid from the horse, her legs nearly giving out. "And you said we were partners." "Partners don't risk their lives for each other after 3 weeks." "Maybe your partners don't, mine do." Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a rough, disbelieving sound. "You're out of your mind." "Probably, but I'm alive, and so are you." She pointed at his shirt. "Now let me look at that wound before you bleed out and make a liar of me." He didn't argue, as Lena cleaned and bandaged the cut. Not deep, thank the skies, just painful. Rowan said quietly, "They'll come after us harder now. Thorne knows we're looking into your father's death. He knows we have samples, which means whoever's behind this knows too." "Good," Lena said, tying off the bandage with more force than necessary. "Let them come, because I'm not stopping until I find out who killed my father, and yours, and 7 innocent children. I don't care how many men they send. I don't care how dangerous it gets." She looked up, met his eyes. "I'm done hiding, Rowan. I'm done being afraid. So if you're having second thoughts about this partnership, say so now, because I'm going forward with or without you." Rowan's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper. Respect, maybe even admiration. "No second thoughts," he said. "But Lena?" It was the first time he'd used her given name. "What?" "The next time you charge into a fight, you can't win. At least bring a weapon. Despite everything, the danger, the exhaustion, the blood," Lena smiled. "Deal." They reached the northern crossing 2 days later, moving only at night and sleeping in shifts with weapons close. The samples from the valley were wrapped carefully in Lena's saddlebag, each vial labeled in her father's methodical system. Evidence. Proof. The kind of truth that could destroy empires or get them both killed. The crossing was a ramshackle ferry operation run by a woman named Garrett, who asked no questions as long as the coin was good. Rowan paid double, and she still looked at them like they were ghosts already. Storm's coming, Garrett said as she poled them across the churning water. Big one. You'd best find shelter soon. Lena looked at the horizon. The sky was bruised purple and green, the kind of color that meant violence was building. Her skin prickled with electricity. How far to the nearest town? Rowan asked. Millfield's 6 miles north, but if that's where you're headed, you picked a bad time. Garrett spat into the water. They've got hangings scheduled for tomorrow. 3 people accused of witchcraft, weather manipulation. The whole town's in a frenzy. Lena's blood turned cold. What did you say? Witchcraft. Someone's been causing storms, killing livestock, ruining crops. The magistrate finally caught the ones responsible. Or so they claim. Garrett's eyes flicked to them. Though between you and me, the evidence looked thin, but people need someone to blame when the world goes wrong. Rowan's expression had gone carefully blank. Who's the magistrate? Sir Roland Pierce. Came from the capital 2 months ago. Very thorough. Very convinced he's rooting out evil. She paused. Very connected to the Ashford family. Of course he was. They reached the far shore and Rowan helped Lena off the ferry with hands that were steady, despite the tension radiating through his shoulders. We need to get to Millfield, he said quietly as they mounted their horses. Why? It's a trap. If Pierce is connected to the Ashfords, he knows we're coming. Exactly. Which means he's trying to send a message. Rowan's jaw clenched. 3 people are about to die for crimes they didn't commit, crimes that someone else engineered, just like your father, just like those children. We can't let that happen. We can't stop a hanging, Rowan. We're 2 people. They'll arrest us, or worse. Not if we have proof. He gestured to her saddlebag. We have samples. We have your father's research. If we can demonstrate how atmospheric manipulation actually works, we can prove those people are innocent. And reveal that someone with real power has been weaponizing weather for years, that'll get us killed. Probably. Rowan's eyes met hers, storm gray and absolutely resolute. But it's the right thing to do. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to point out that they'd barely survived one ambush, that riding into a hostile town during a murder trial was suicide, that the smart move was to disappear into the wilderness and live to fight another day. But she looked at Rowan's face and saw her father, saw the same stubborn integrity that had driven him to treat patients who couldn't pay, to challenge physicians who valued profit over healing, to die carrying guilt for crimes he didn't commit because he couldn't bear the thought of children suffering. Fine, she said, but we do this smart. We gather information first, find out who's being accused and why. Look for connections to our investigation. Agreed. They rode for Millfield as the storm clouds gathered overhead, each mile bringing them closer to answers and death in equal measure. Millfield was a market town that had seen better days. The buildings were weathered, the streets muddy, and the gallows in the central square looked far too well maintained for Lena's comfort. People moved through the streets with their heads down, conversations dying as Rowan and Lena passed. Fear hung in the air like smoke. They found lodging at a rundown inn called the Broken Wheel, where the proprietor took their money without making eye contact. Lena's room was small and smelled of mildew, but it had a window that overlooked the square and the gallows. She was staring at them when Rowan knocked. Come in? He entered, carrying 2 bowls of something that might have been stew. Eat. You'll need your strength. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. He set 1 bowl on the small table. I asked around. The accused are a physician named Dr. Marcus Webb, his assistant Sarah Chen, and a farmer named Thomas Kirby. Lena's head snapped up. A physician? Yes. Webb specialized in plant-based remedies. He'd been treating patients in the area for 5 years when crops started failing and livestock began dying. The symptoms matched poisoning, but no one could identify the source. Then children started getting sick, similar to what happened with your father's patients. The room spun. They framed him the same way. It gets worse. Webb started investigating. He found evidence of atmospheric tampering, unusual pressure readings, chemical deposits in the soil. He was about to present his findings to the regional governor when Pierce arrived, arrested him, and charged him with causing the very disasters he was trying to expose. And his assistant? Sarah Chen was helping with the investigation. She's a chemist. Brilliant, from what I gather. She analyzed the soil samples and confirmed Webb's suspicions. Let me guess. The farmer witnessed something he shouldn't have. Rowan nodded grimly. Thomas Kirby saw men tampering with the weather instruments near his property. When he confronted them, they claimed to be government surveyors. But Kirby's not stupid. He recognized one of them as working for the Ashford estate. Lena's hands clenched. This is the same pattern. They're testing atmospheric weapons, framing physicians who get too close to the truth, and eliminating witnesses. How many times have they done this? I don't know, but it ends here. Rowan pulled a folded paper from his coat. I managed to get a copy of the trial transcripts. The evidence against Webb is laughably thin, circumstantial at best. But Pierce is pushing for immediate execution. The hanging's scheduled for noon tomorrow. That gives us less than 18 hours. Which is why we work through the night. Rowan spread the transcripts on the table. We need to connect what happened here to your father's case. Build an argument that's impossible to ignore. And we need to find out who's really behind this before they silence Webb permanently. They worked by candlelight, cross-referencing dates, locations, chemical compounds. Lena's father's journals filled in gaps that Webb's research had left open, and together the pattern became impossible to deny. Someone had been testing atmospheric manipulation techniques for at least 7 years. They'd targeted remote areas with vulnerable populations. They'd used physicians as unwitting test subjects and then destroyed them when they got too close to the truth. And the mastermind behind it all had to be someone with significant resources, scientific knowledge, and absolutely no conscience. Look at this, Lena said, pointing to a series of dates in her father's journal. He documented 3 separate incidents of unexplained atmospheric events in the Eastern Valley, all within 6 months of each other. Each one corresponded with a visit from a research team studying agricultural improvements. Research team from where? He doesn't say, just that they were well-funded and very interested in his medicinal plant cultivation methods. Her finger traced down the page. But here, he mentions the team leader, Dr. Vincent Harrow. Rowan went very still. Harrow, you know him? I know of him. He was one of my father's colleagues before they had a falling out. Brilliant chemist, obsessed with weather control as a military advantage. Rowan's expression darkened. My father thought he was dangerous, said Harrow saw people as variables in an equation rather than lives. Where is he now? Dead, supposedly. He died in a laboratory fire 3 years ago. Rowan's eyes narrowed. Right around the time your father's patient started dying. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. He's not dead, Lena breathed. He faked his death and continued his experiments. That's why there's been a pattern of atmospheric disasters across the region. He's been field testing his theories. And when physicians like my father and Webb got too close, he eliminated them. Using his connections to the Ashford family to provide cover and frame innocent people. Rowan stood abruptly, began pacing. But where is he? If he's alive and still experimenting, he needs a base of operations. Somewhere remote with access to the right atmospheric conditions. Lena flipped through more pages, her mind racing. Then she stopped. Here, my father mentions meeting with the research team at an old mining facility in the northern hills. He says it had been converted into some kind of atmospheric research station. I know that facility. It's about 20 miles from here. Rowan's hands clenched. If Harrow's there, that's where we'll find proof. Real proof. Not just documents, but equipment, records, everything we need to expose him. Then we go tonight. No, you stay here and prepare the evidence we already have. If I don't come back, stop. Lena stood, met his eyes. We're partners. Where you go, I go. End of discussion. Lena, this is different from the valley. If Harrow's there, he'll be protected. Armed guards. Security measures. It could be a death trap. Then we'd better not get caught. She began gathering the journals, her movements decisive. We have 3 hours until full dark. That gives us time to reach the facility, gather evidence, and get back before anyone notices we're gone. We can present everything at the trial tomorrow. Proof that Webb is innocent, proof that Harrow is alive and behind the atmospheric attacks, proof that the real criminal is still free. Rowan stared at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted, the last wall coming down, the final reservation crumbling. When this is over, he said quietly, Assuming we survive, I'm never taking on a partner again. You're going to give me a heart condition." Despite everything, Lena smiled. "You're the one who told me not to close my eyes." I'm starting to regret that. But he was already gathering his weapons. The mining facility crouched in the hills like a cancer, all rusted metal and broken windows. But the decay was a facade. As they approached on foot, having left the horses a mile back, Lena could see new construction hidden among the ruins. Reinforced walls, fresh locks, and light bleeding through cracks in supposedly abandoned buildings. Someone was definitely home. They circled the perimeter, staying low. Rowan moved like he'd done this before, smooth, silent, efficient. Lena did her best to match him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "2 guards at the main entrance," Rowan murmured. "Probably more inside. We need a different way in." Lena studied the buildings. "There. The old ventilation shaft. If it's anything like the mining operations my father used to visit, it should connect to the main chamber." "Can you fit?" "I'm smaller than you. I'll have a better chance." Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. "I'll create a distraction. When the guards move, you go. Get inside, find proof, get out. Don't engage, don't take risks, just evidence." "What kind of distraction?" His smile was sharp. "The kind that involves fire and loud noises. Give me 5 minutes." He disappeared into the darkness. Lena waited, counting heartbeats, watching the guards. They looked bored, leaning against the wall, passing a flask between them. Routine watch, no expectation of trouble. That was about to change. An explosion ripped through the night from the far side of the facility. The guards jerked upright, shouting. More men poured from the buildings, running toward the flames. In the chaos, no one was watching the ventilation shaft. Lena ran. The shaft's grate had rusted through. She pried it open, ignoring the way the metal bit into her palms, and squeezed inside. The space was tight, painfully tight, and absolutely dark. She forced herself forward, inch by inch, her breath echoing in the confined space. The shaft opened into what had once been a storage room. Lena dropped through, landing hard on concrete. She froze, listening. Voices. Footsteps. All moving away toward the distraction. She moved quickly through the facility, staying in shadows. Most of the rooms were empty or filled with mining equipment, but then she found it. A laboratory that looked like it belonged in a university rather than a derelict mine. Tables covered with instruments, charts mapping atmospheric patterns, and journals, dozens of them, filled with meticulous notes and handwriting that definitely wasn't her father's. Lena grabbed the nearest journal and flipped it open. Subject Group 7, Eastern Valley Trial. Compound X14 dispersed via aerosol at 0600 hours. Atmospheric pressure manipulated to 29.1 inches mercury. Result. Localized toxicity in medicinal plants as predicted. Subsequent harvest by Dr. Whitaker confirmed. Awaiting reports of human casualties to assess efficacy. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the book. They'd done it deliberately. They'd poisoned the plants knowing her father would use them, knowing children would die. And they documented it like a science experiment. She kept reading, rage building with every word. More trials, more victims. Each one carefully planned, executed, and recorded. Her father, Webb. A dozen other physicians across the region, all destroyed by men who saw murder as research. Then she found the page that made her blood turn to ice. Trial 23, Blackmore Estate. Subject, Duke Marcus Blackmore. Method, atmospheric storm manipulation combined with terrain targeting. Objective, eliminate opposition to expansion of testing grounds. Result, success. Death ruled accidental. Estate control transferred to heir, currently deemed non-threatening. Rowan's father. They'd murdered Rowan's father. And the handwriting at the bottom of the page, signing off on the kill order, was instantly recognizable from a dozen legal documents Lena had seen in Greycrest Society papers. Lady Constance Ashford, not just connected to the conspiracy, not just providing cover, she was running it. "Well," a voice said from the doorway, "this is unfortunate." Lena spun. A man stood in the entrance, late 50s, gray hair, expensive coat despite the industrial surroundings. His face was bland, forgettable, except for his eyes. They were the coldest thing Lena had ever seen. "Dr. Harrow, I presume?" she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Miss Whitaker, I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know I'm about to kill you, so pleasantries seem pointless. He stepped into the room, and Lena saw the pistol in his hand. Though I must admit I'm impressed. It took you much less time to find this place than I anticipated. Your father would have been proud. My father would have been horrified by what you've done. Your father was a brilliant man, hampered by conscience. Such a waste. Harrow gestured at the journals. You've read enough to understand, I'm sure. Weather manipulation isn't just possible, it's the future. The ability to control storms, to weaponize atmospheric conditions, to eliminate enemies without leaving evidence of murder? That's power, Miss Whitaker. Real power. You killed children. I conducted necessary research. The data from those trials advanced the field by decades. They were 6 years old. They were variables in an equation. Harrow's expression didn't change. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Surely even you understand that. Lena's hand closed around the journal. Constance Ashford is funding this. Lady Ashford recognizes opportunity when she sees it. The Ashford family has been losing influence for years. But with weather manipulation technology, they'll control agriculture, trade routes, military supremacy. They'll be untouchable. And anyone who gets in their way dies. Physicians, farmers, dukes. The Duke of Blackmore was particularly problematic. His father, I mean. The current Duke seemed content to play with barometers and chase theories. We didn't consider him a threat. Harrow's smile was thin. Though I see now we underestimated him, and you. You won't get away with this. I already have. Your partner is currently surrounded by my men. The explosion was clever, but predictable. They're bringing him in now. Harrow raised the pistol. You'll both die tonight. Tragic accident during a storm. The journals will disappear, the web will hang tomorrow, and the research will continue. Lena's mind raced. The journals. The evidence. If she died here, it all died with her. Unless... Did you know my father figured it out? She said, stalling. Not the full scope, but enough. He knew someone was tampering with atmospheric conditions. He documented everything, dates, locations, chemical signatures, and he sent copies to colleagues across the region. It was a lie. But Harrow's expression flickered. You're bluffing. Am I? How do you think I found this place? My father's notes led me here, and if anything happens to me, those same notes will reach the authorities. The real authorities, not the ones you've bought. No one will believe a disgraced physician's daughter. Maybe not, but they'll believe a duke. Rowan Blackmore has resources you can't imagine. Connections that go beyond the Ashford family's reach. You kill us tonight, and you'll have painted targets on your own backs. Then I'll kill him too. Try it, but he's not alone anymore. He's been building alliances, gathering supporters. People who believe atmospheric manipulation is real and who want it stopped. Another lie, but Lena sold it with everything she had. You kill us, and you start a war you can't win. Harrow's finger tightened on the trigger, and then the window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Rowan came through like a hurricane, hitting Harrow from the side. The pistol fired wild, the bullet embedding in the wall 6 inches from Lena's head. They went down hard, Rowan's fist connecting with Harrow's face once, twice. The older man struggled, surprisingly strong, his hand scrabbling for the fallen pistol. Lena grabbed it first. She'd never held a gun before. It was heavier than she expected, cold and alien in her grip. Don't move, she said. Both men froze. Rowan looked up at her, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but alive. Alive. And something fierce and proud in his expression. Harrow laughed. You won't shoot me. You're a physician's daughter. You save lives. You don't take them. He was right. Lena's hands were shaking, her finger nowhere near the trigger, but she didn't lower the gun. You're right, she said quietly. I won't kill you, but I'll make sure you face justice. I'll make sure the world knows exactly what you've done, and I'll spend the rest of my life destroying everything you've built. The journals, Rowan said, his voice rough. Lena, get the journals. She wanted to argue, wanted to keep the gun trained on Harrow, but Rowan was right. The evidence mattered more than revenge. She backed toward the table, keeping the pistol aimed at Harrow, and grabbed an armful of journals. Too many to carry easily, but she managed, pressing them against her chest. Time to go, Rowan said, getting to his feet. He looked at Harrow with an expression that promised death. If we meet again, I won't be as merciful as she is. They ran. Behind them, Harrow shouted orders. Guards appeared from nowhere, cutting off their escape route. The shaft, Lena gasped. Too narrow for me. You go. I'll hold them off. Absolutely not. Rowan grabbed her shoulders. Lena, the evidence is more important than I am. Get it to Millfield. Stop the hanging. Expose Harrow and Ashford. Promise me. I'm not leaving you. Promise me. A bullet whined past them, close enough that Lena felt the air displacement. She looked at Rowan, at this man who'd pulled her from darkness, taught her to stand in storms, made her believe she could fight back against a world that wanted her destroyed. I promise, she whispered. He kissed her then, brief and desperate and tasting of blood and smoke and absolutely everything that mattered. Then he shoved her toward the shaft. Run, and don't close your eyes. Lena ran. She squeezed through the ventilation shaft, journals clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she heard shouting, gunfire. Rowan's voice raised in defiance. She ran until her lungs burned, until she reached the horses, until she was racing through darkness toward Millfield with evidence that would either save 3 innocent people or get her killed trying. The storm broke as she reached the town, rain lashing down, wind howling, lightning turning night to day in violent bursts. Lena didn't slow. She rode straight to the magistrate's office and threw open the door, dripping wet and holding journals like weapons. Sir Roland Pierce looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from annoyance to recognition to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. Miss Whitaker, what an unexpected— I have proof, Lena said, her voice cutting through his words like steel. Proof that Dr. Webb is innocent. Proof that the atmospheric disasters were caused by deliberate manipulation. Proof that the real criminal is Dr. Vincent Harrow, funded by Lady Constance Ashford, and that they've been murdering people for years to cover their experiments. She slammed the journals on his desk. And if you don't postpone that hanging and listen to what I have to say, I'll make sure every newspaper in the country knows you executed innocent people to protect traitors and murderers. Pierce stared at her, then at the journals, then back at her. You have 10 minutes, he said. Lena smiled, sharp and dangerous and absolutely unafraid. I only need 5. Pierce's office fell silent except for the rain hammering against the windows. Lena stood before his desk, water pooling at her feet. Harrow's journals spread between them like accusations made flesh. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, not because the fear was gone, but because she'd pushed past it into something colder and more dangerous. Pierce reached for the nearest journal, his movements careful. These are serious allegations, Miss Whitaker. These are confessions. Lena flipped open the journal to the page detailing her father's case. Doctor, Vincent Harrow documented every test, every manipulation, every death, including the one you're about to execute 3 innocent people for tomorrow. Pierce read in silence, his expression unreadable. Behind him, his clerk had gone pale. This details atmospheric manipulation as a weapons program, Pierce said slowly, funded by the Ashford family. You understand what you're accusing one of the most powerful families in the region of doing? I understand I have proof. Do you understand that if you hang Dr. Webb tomorrow, you'll be murdering an innocent man, and I'll make sure everyone knows it? Is that a threat? It's a promise. Lena leaned forward. I have 3 witnesses scheduled to die at noon. I have documented evidence that they were framed, and I have testimony from a duke that will corroborate everything in those journals. So you can either postpone the execution and investigate properly, or you can become complicit in murder. Your choice, magistrate. Pierce's jaw tightened. Where did you obtain these journals? From Harrow's laboratory in the Northern Hills, the converted mining facility. And the Duke of Blackmore, where is he? The question hit like a fist to Lena's chest. She saw Rowan again, shoving her toward the ventilation shaft, kissing her like it was goodbye, turning to face armed men alone. He's either fighting his way out of that facility, or he's dead, Lena said, her voice flat. But even if Harrow killed him, the evidence stands, and I'm not backing down. Something shifted in Pierce's expression. Respect, maybe. Or calculation. The Ashford family will deny everything, he said. They'll say these journals are forgeries. that you fabricated evidence to clear your own father's name. Then have them analyzed. The handwriting, the chemical formulas, the atmospheric data, it's all verifiable. Dr. Webb can confirm the science. And if you search that facility, you'll find equipment, records, everything you need to prove this is real. Pierce was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the journal carefully. I'll postpone the execution pending investigation. 24 hours. That's all I can give you without concrete proof beyond these journals. Then we get proof. We? You're going to send men to that facility, and I'm going with them. Lena's hands flattened on the desk. Because if the Duke of Blackmore is still alive, I'm bringing him back. And if he's not, her voice cracked just slightly. Then I'm making sure the people who killed him face justice. Pierce studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Whitaker. I've been called both. I've stopped caring which is accurate. Very well. I'll assemble a team. We leave at first light. He paused. But understand this. If we find nothing at that facility, if these journals prove to be false, you'll be arrested for conspiracy and obstruction. Are you willing to risk that? I'm willing to risk everything. Because what was left to lose? Her reputation was already destroyed. Her father was dead. And Rowan? She refused to finish that thought. Lena spent the hours before dawn in the town's small medical clinic, where Dr. Webb and his assistant were being held. The guard Pierce assigned to watch her, a grizzled man named Cutter, who looked like he'd seen too many wars, stood outside the door while Lena was allowed 15 minutes to speak with the accused. Webb was older than she'd expected, late 50s with gray hair and gentle eyes that had gone hollow from days in captivity. His assistant, Sarah Chen, was younger, maybe 30, with sharp features and hands that trembled only when she thought no one was looking. Miss Whitaker, Webb said as she entered, Pierce said you brought evidence. I brought the truth. Lena set one of Harrow's journals on the small table between them. Dr. Vincent Harrow has been conducting atmospheric manipulation experiments for years. He poisoned your land the same way he poisoned my father's plants. You were framed. Webb's hands closed around the journal like it was a lifeline. He read in silence, Sarah leaning over his shoulder. Lena watched their expressions shift from confusion to horror to something that looked almost like vindication. I knew it, Sarah breathed. I knew the atmospheric readings were wrong. The pressure changes were too precise, too targeted. But no one would listen. They'll listen now. Lena hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. Pierce has postponed the execution. We're raiding Harrow's facility at dawn. If we find equipment and records that match these journals, you'll be freed. And if you don't, Webb asked quietly, then I'll die trying to prove you're innocent. Because I know what it's like to carry guilt for crimes you didn't commit. I know what it does to you, how it hollows you out until there's nothing left but shame and grief. Her throat tightened. My father died believing he killed 7 children. I won't let that happen to you. Webb's eyes filled with tears. Your father was a good man. I met him once at a medical conference. He presented research on atmospheric effects on medicinal compounds. Brilliant work. Revolutionary. Work that got him killed. Work that will save lives if we can expose what Harrow's doing. Webb straightened, some of the hollowness leaving his eyes. Tell me what you need from me. Tell me everything about your investigation, every detail. Because when we stand trial, and we will stand trial, all of us, I need to be able to connect your findings to my father's research, to Harrow's experiments. I need an unbreakable chain of evidence. They talked until the guard knocked to signal her time was up. By then, Lena had filled 3 pages with notes, and her head was spinning with chemical formulas and atmospheric patterns. As she stood to leave, Sarah caught her hand. The Duke of Blackmore. Pierce said he's missing. Is he? I don't know. The words came out rougher than Lena intended, but I'm going to find out. The raid team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, 12 men including Pierce, all armed, all looking at Lena like she was either a lunatic or a prophet. She'd borrowed dry clothes from the innkeeper's daughter and strapped her father's medical bag across her chest. It held bandages, sutures, and a small vial of laudanum, just in case. Cutter handed her a knife. You know how to use this? Point the sharp end at people who want to kill me? His mouth twitched. Close enough. They rode hard, reaching the facility as the sun broke over the hills. The fires from Rowan's distraction had burned out, leaving charred ruins and the smell of destruction. But the main buildings were intact and ominously silent. Pierce raised his hand, signaling a halt. Spread out. Secure the perimeter first. Lena's horse danced sideways, sensing her tension. The facility looked abandoned, but that could be a trap. Harrow wasn't stupid. He'd had hours to prepare defenses, to hide evidence, A gunshot cracked through the morning air. One of Pierce's men went down, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, finding cover behind old mining equipment as more shots rang out from the buildings. "How many?" Pierce shouted. "At least 6. Cutter fired back, his rifle spitting smoke. "Maybe more inside," Pierce swore viciously. "This was supposed to be a legal raid, not a siege." "Harrow doesn't care about legal," Lena said, sliding from her horse. "He cares about protecting his research." "Stay back!" But Lena was already moving, staying low, using the terrain the way Rowan had taught her. The shooting was concentrated on the main entrance, which meant the ventilation shaft might still be unguarded. She found it exactly where she'd left it, the grate still pried open. Behind her, the gunfight intensified. Pierce's men were pinned down, and more of Harrow's guards were emerging from the buildings. Lena didn't hesitate. She squeezed into the shaft, her father's bag scraping against the metal walls. The darkness was absolute, but she'd done this once before. She knew the way. The shaft opened into the storage room. Lena dropped through, landing in a crouch. The knife cutter had given her ready. The room was empty. She moved quickly through the facility, her heart hammering. The laboratory was exactly as she'd left it, except the journals were gone. Every single one. The tables had been cleared, the instruments packed away. Harrow had sanitized the evidence. No. "Looking for something?" Lena spun. Lady Constance Ashford stood in the doorway, immaculate despite the chaos outside. She wore traveling clothes and held a small pistol with the comfort of someone who knew how to use it. "The journals are already on their way to my estate," Constance said pleasantly, "along with anything else that could implicate me. By tomorrow, this facility will be a pile of rubble, and you'll be a footnote in a tragedy about a disturbed young woman who made wild accusations before dying in a terrible accident. Pierce knows the truth. I gave him one of Harrow's journals, which he'll be forced to dismiss as a clever forgery once we discredit you." Constance stepped into the room. "Really, Miss Whitaker, did you think you could challenge my family and win? We've been consolidating power for generations. Your father was nothing. The Duke of Blackmore is nothing. And you," she smiled, "you're less than nothing. Where's Rowan?" "The Duke?" "Harrow shot him during the escape attempt. The body's in the lower chambers. We'll burn it with everything else." The word should have destroyed her, should have sent Lena to her knees, but all she felt was white-hot rage. "You killed him," Lena said quietly. "I eliminated a problem. There's a difference. You murdered 7 children. You destroyed my father. You framed innocent physicians and hanged them for crimes you committed. I advanced scientific progress and protected my family's interests. If people died in the process," Constance shrugged. "That's the cost of greatness." Lena's hand tightened on the knife. "You're not great. You're a monster. I'm a survivor. And you, Miss Whitaker, are about to become a casualty." Constance raised the pistol, and Rowan's voice said, "I wouldn't do that." He emerged from the shadows behind Constance, moving like death incarnate. Blood soaked his shirt, his left arm hung at an awkward angle, and his face was pale, but his eyes were absolutely clear, and the gun in his right hand was rock steady. "Your Grace." Constance's composure cracked, just slightly. "You're supposed to be dead." "I'm hard to kill." "Ask anyone." Rowan's gaze flicked to Lena. "You all right?" "Better now." Her voice shook. "You're bleeding." "I've noticed. We'll deal with it later." He returned his attention to Constance. "Drop the gun, carefully." "Or what? You'll shoot me? A duke killing an unarmed noblewoman? That'll destroy what's left of your reputation." "I'm not going to shoot you." Rowan's smile was terrible. "I'm going to let Lena decide what to do with you. And frankly, I think you'd prefer the bullet." Lena stepped forward, the knife still in her hand. She thought about 7 dead children. about her father's hollow eyes in the months before he died, about Dr. Webb and Sarah Chen and Thomas Kirby waiting to hang for crimes they didn't commit. And she thought about Rowan, injured and bleeding but alive, standing beside her when he could have run. "Drop the gun," Lena said, "and tell me where Harrow is." Constance's hand trembled. "You won't kill me. You're not capable of it." "You're right. I won't kill you." Lena's voice was ice. "But I'll make sure you stand trial for every death, every manipulation, every life you've destroyed, and I'll watch you hang for it." For a long moment, Constance didn't move. Then slowly, she set the pistol on the floor. "Harrow's in the lower chambers," she said, "destroying the remaining evidence." Rowan gestured with his gun. "Show us." They descended into darkness, Constance leading the way with Rowan's gun pressed against her spine and Lena following close behind. The lower chambers were vast, a warren of rooms carved from rock, filled with equipment that looked like something from a nightmare. Weather instruments, chemical compounds, and in the center of it all, Dr. Vincent Harrow, feeding papers into a furnace. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting to resignation. "Lady Ashford, I told you to leave an hour ago." "She's been detained," Rowan said, stepping into the light, "along with all your research." Harrow's eyes went to the furnace. "Most of it's already gone." "Most isn't all." Lena moved to the tables, gathering papers, journals, anything Harrow hadn't yet destroyed. "And we have testimony. Witnesses. Physical evidence from the sites where you tested your weapons. None of which will matter once the Ashford family's lawyers are finished with you." "The Ashford family's credibility is about to be obliterated," Rowan said, "along with their fortune, their lands, and their freedom. You should have chosen your patrons more carefully, Harrow." Above them, the sound of gunfire had stopped. Footsteps echoed down the stairs, Pierce and his men, weapons drawn. The magistrate took in the scene with one sweeping glance. "Dr. Harrow, Lady Ashford, you're both under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and treason." Constance laughed. A brittle, breaking sound. "You can't arrest me. Do you have any idea who my family is? What we're capable of?" "I know exactly what you're capable of," Pierce said grimly, "which is why you'll be tried in the capital under royal jurisdiction where your family's influence can't touch you." As his men moved to bind Constance and Harrow, Lena finally let herself breathe. The journals were safe, the evidence was secured, the truth would come out. They'd won. But Rowan was swaying on his feet, his face gray. "Lena," he said quietly, "I think I need to sit down." He collapsed before she could reach him. Ulch. Lena worked by lantern light in the facility's makeshift medical room, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The bullet had gone through Rowan's shoulder, clean entry and exit, thank the skies, but he'd lost blood and the wound was inflamed. "This is going to hurt," she warned, threading the suture needle. "Everything hurts." Rowan's voice was tight with pain. "Just do it." She did. The stitching took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Rowan bore it in silence, his jaw clenched, his good hand gripping the table edge until his knuckles went white. When Lena finally tied off the last suture, she allowed herself a moment of relief. The bleeding had stopped. The wound was clean. He'd be sore for weeks, but he'd live. "You're surprisingly good at this," Rowan said, his voice rough. "My father trained me well." Lena began bandaging the shoulder, though he'd be horrified that I'm using his techniques to patch up reckless dukes who think they're immortal. "I never thought I was immortal. Just stubborn. That's even worse." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the smell of blood and gunpowder, Rowan smiled. "When Harrow shot me, I thought that was it. Thought I'd die in that facility without telling you." He stopped. "Telling me what?" His gray eyes met hers. "That I'm glad you didn't run. That night in the valley when I told you to escape, I'm glad you came back for me. Even though it was reckless and dangerous and absolutely insane. Partners don't leave each other behind. We're more than partners now." He reached up with his good hand, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Aren't we?" Lena's breath caught. "Rowan, I know, wrong time, wrong place. We're both covered in blood and the magistrate's waiting upstairs to take our statements, and your reputation is about to be dragged through every scandal sheet in the country because you're associated with me." He paused. But I needed to say it, before something else tries to kill us. You're assuming we'll survive the trial. We've survived everything else. He was right, they had. Lena leaned forward and kissed him, careful of his injuries, gentle despite the urgency singing through her veins. He tasted like blood and smoke and absolutely everything she hadn't known she needed. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. If we survive this, I'm never chasing another storm with you. Liar. Fine. But next time, you're the one crawling through ventilation shafts? Deal. The trial began 3 weeks later in the capital city of Harmont, in a courthouse that had witnessed centuries of justice and corruption in equal measure. The Crown had taken personal interest in the case. Atmospheric weapons were a matter of national security, and the involvement of a prominent noble family made it politically explosive. Lena sat in the witness gallery, wearing a simple gray dress that Aunt Miriam had sent via messenger along with a note that said only, "Make them listen." She intended to. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, the press gallery overflowing with journalists who'd been covering the scandal for weeks. The mood was electric, hungry for blood, desperate for spectacle. Lady Constance Ashford sat at the defendant's table looking diminished without her usual finery. Beside her, Dr. Vincent Harrow stared straight ahead, his expression blank. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Harriet Crane, called the court to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. This court will now hear testimony in the matter of the Crown versus Ashford and Harrow. Charges include murder, conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful experimentation, and crimes against the realm. She looked directly at the defendants. How do you plead? Not guilty, Constance said, her voice carrying the aristocratic arrogance that had carried her through a lifetime of getting away with everything. Harrow said nothing. Justice Crane's expression didn't change. The prosecution may present its case. The Crown prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Julian Wade, stood. Your Honor, the prosecution will demonstrate that the defendants engaged in a years-long conspiracy to develop atmospheric manipulation as a weapon, resulting in numerous deaths including 7 children, multiple physicians, and Duke Marcus Blackmore. We will present documentary evidence, expert testimony, and physical proof of equipment used in these crimes. He called his first witness. Dr. Marcus Webb took the stand, his hands shaking slightly but his voice clear. He testified about the atmospheric anomalies, the poisoned land, the framing. He explained the science in terms simple enough for the jury to understand but detailed enough to be credible. Sarah Chen followed, providing chemical analysis that connected the compounds found at multiple sites to Harrow's laboratory. Then it was Lena's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that threatened to buckle, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she was sworn in. Wade approached with the kind of gentle authority that put witnesses at ease. Miss Whitaker, please tell the court about your father. Lena's throat tightened, but she'd practiced this, prepared for it. My father was Dr. Jonathan Whitaker. He was a physician who specialized in plant-based medicine. He dedicated his life to treating patients who couldn't afford expensive city doctors. He was brilliant and kind, and he died believing he'd killed 7 children through negligence. Her voice cracked. But he didn't. He was murdered, slowly, deliberately, by people who saw him as an obstacle to their research. Wade held up one of Harrow's journals. Is this the evidence you recovered from Dr. Harrow's facility? Yes. And what does it contain? Detailed records of atmospheric manipulation experiments, dates, locations, methods, results, including the deliberate poisoning of medicinal plants my father harvested, knowing it would result in deaths he'd be blamed for. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Wade let it build before continuing. Miss Whitaker, you've been accused of fabricating this evidence to clear your father's name. How do you respond? I respond that the science is verifiable. The atmospheric data matches weather records from multiple independent sources. The chemical signatures in soil samples from affected sites match compounds documented in Dr. Harrow's journals. And the equipment we recovered from his laboratory is specifically designed for atmospheric manipulation. She looked directly at the jury. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. Wade walked her through every detail. The connection between her father's research and Harrow's experiments, the pattern of physician deaths, the deliberate targeting of vulnerable communities for testing. By the time he finished, 2 jurors were crying. Then Constance Ashford's lawyer, a man named Reginald Holt, who charged fees that could feed a village for a year, stood for cross-examination. Miss Whitaker. His tone was oily sympathy. You've suffered a terrible tragedy. Your father's death must have been devastating. It was. Devastating enough to make you see conspiracies where none exist? To twist innocent research into malicious intent? The intent is documented in Dr. Harrow's own handwriting. Handwriting, you claim, belongs to Dr. Harrow. But you're not a handwriting expert, are you? No, but the Crown has retained 3 independent experts who have verified. Yes. Holt waved dismissively. But experts can be wrong, motivated by bias, paid to see what they're told to see. Wade shot to his feet. Objection. Counsel is impugning the integrity of Crown witnesses without evidence. Sustained, Justice Crane said. Mr. Holt, stick to questions. Holt smiled. Of course, Your Honor. Miss Whitaker, isn't it true that you were romantically involved with the Duke of Blackmore during this investigation? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Lena felt her face flush. The Duke and I worked together to uncover the truth. That's not what I asked. Were you romantically involved? Our relationship is irrelevant to... It's extremely relevant. A disgraced woman, desperate to clear her family name, becomes involved with a powerful duke known for his obsession with conspiracy theories about his father's death. Together, you concoct an elaborate story that conveniently absolves you both of your family shames and places blame on my client. Holt's voice rose. Isn't that the real truth, Miss Whitaker? No. Well, then explain why we should believe a woman with every reason to lie, whose only corroboration comes from a man who benefits equally from this fabricated narrative. Lena's hands clenched. Every instinct screamed to lash out, to defend herself, to make Holt see that she was telling the truth. But she'd learned something in the past months. Learned it from Rowan, from standing in storms, from refusing to close her eyes. The truth didn't need her rage. It just needed her clarity. You should believe me, Lena said quietly, because 7 children are dead, because Dr. Webb nearly hanged for crimes he didn't commit, because Duke Marcus Blackmore died in a manufactured storm, and because the evidence, all of it, from multiple independent sources, points to a single, undeniable conclusion. Your client weaponized the weather and murdered anyone who got in her way. She looked past Holt, directly at Constance Ashford, and no amount of expensive lawyers or aristocratic arrogance will change that. The courtroom fell silent. Holt opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. Justice Crane's expression was unreadable. The witness may step down. Lena returned to her seat on shaking legs. Across the gallery, she caught Rowan's eye. He was sitting in the front row, his arm still in a sling, and the look he gave her was pure pride. The trial continued for 2 more days. The Crown presented equipment seized from Harrow's laboratory, instruments designed to create localized atmospheric changes, chemical compounds that could alter weather patterns when dispersed into the air, detailed maps showing test sites across the region. Dr. Harrow's own research assistant, a young man who'd fled to the capital when he realized what was being done, testified about experiments, about casualties dismissed as acceptable losses, about Harrow's cold calculations of human life versus scientific progress. And finally, the Crown called the Duke of Blackmore to the stand. Rowan testified about his father's death, about the atmospheric anomalies that didn't match natural storm patterns, about his 15 years of research that led him to the same conclusions Lena's father had reached. When Holt tried to discredit him as a grief-stricken son chasing delusions, Rowan simply produced a sheaf of atmospheric readings from the day his father died. These are records from 3 independent weather stations within 50 miles of Blackmore Estate, he said calmly. All of them show normal atmospheric pressure and wind patterns on the day of my father's death. Yet the official report describes a freak storm with hail and lightning. Either every weather station malfunctioned simultaneously or the storm was localized and artificial. He paused. I'll let the jury decide which is more likely. Holt had no response. On the final day, Justice Crane addressed the jury. You have heard testimony from multiple witnesses. You have examined physical evidence, documentary records, and expert analysis. Your task is to determine beyond reasonable doubt whether the defendants are guilty of the charges brought against them. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged woman with the weathered hands of a farmer, stood. "On the charge of murder, how do you find?" "Guilty!" The courtroom exploded. Justice Crane gavelled for order, but the shouting continued. Constance Ashford had gone white. Her composure finally shattered. Beside her, Harrow simply stared at nothing. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder?" "Guilty." "On the charge of unlawful experimentation?" "Guilty." "On the charge of crimes against the realm?" "Guilty." Justice Crane pronounced sentence immediately. "Lady Constance Ashford and Dr. Vincent Harrow, you have been found guilty of crimes so heinous they shock the conscience of this court. You have murdered innocent people, including children, in pursuit of power and scientific advancement without moral restraint. The sentence of this court is death by hanging, to be carried out within 1 week." She brought the gavel down with finality. Constance screamed, a raw, broken sound that echoed through the courthouse. Guards dragged her from the courtroom as she shouted threats and curses, her voice fading as the doors closed behind her. Lena sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. They'd won. After 3 years of carrying guilt that wasn't hers, after months of investigation and danger and nearly dying, they'd won. Rowan appeared beside her, his good hand finding hers. "It's over." "Is it?" Lena looked at him, her eyes burning. "They're going to hang. And my father's still dead. Those children are still dead. Nothing we did brings them back." "No, but we gave them justice. We gave them truth." His grip tightened. "And we stopped Harrow and Ashford from killing anyone else. That matters, Lena." It did. She knew it did. But the weight of everything they'd lost pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. When Lena and Rowan emerged, the shouting started. Some people cheering, others screaming accusations, everyone wanting a piece of the spectacle. "Murderer! Justice for the children! The Duke's whore! She's a hero!" The voices crashed over Lena like waves, threatening to pull her under. Her vision started to narrow, the old panic rising. But Rowan was there, his hand warm in hers, his presence steady. "Don't close your eyes," he murmured. "Look at them, see them, and then walk past them like they're nothing." So she did. Lena lifted her chin, met the crowd's gaze, both the hostile and the supportive, and walked through the chaos with her head high. Because she'd faced storms and assassins and the collapse of everything she'd believed about the world. A crowd of shouting strangers was nothing compared to that. They made it to Rowan's carriage, and as the door closed behind them, sealing out the noise, Lena finally let herself collapse. "I can't go back to Greycrest," she said quietly. "They'll never accept me. The scandal will follow me everywhere." "Then don't go back." Rowan shifted to face her. "Come to Blackmore Hall. Be my physician. Help me continue the atmospheric research, the legitimate kind, the kind that saves lives instead of ending them. Build something new from what we've learned. Rowan, if I live at your estate unmarried, the scandal will destroy both our reputations. Then marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Lena stared at him. "What?" "Marry me. Not because it's proper or because it saves your reputation. Marry me because we're partners, because we've stood in storms together and refused to break, because I can't imagine facing the future without you beside me." "That's insane." "Probably, but I've never been particularly sane." His eyes held hers. "What do you say, Lena Whitaker? Will you marry a scandal-ridden duke and spend the rest of your life chasing weather patterns with me?" She should say no. Should point out that marriage wouldn't erase the whispers, that society would call her a fortune hunter and him a fool, that they'd both be better off going their separate ways. But she thought about standing in the rain while Rowan taught her to read storms, about crawling through ventilation shafts and fighting armed men and piecing together the truth from fragments of evidence, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd come back instead of running, about how, for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she could breathe. "Yes," she said. Rowan's smile was like sunrise after a long night. He leaned forward carefully, mindful of his healing shoulder, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "We're going to have a very interesting life," he murmured against her lips. "We're going to have a very difficult life. Same thing. And despite everything, the trial, the execution scheduled for next week, the scandal that would dog them for years, Lena laughed. Because she'd survived. She'd fought back. She'd proven the truth even when the world wanted her to disappear. And now, for the first time since her father died, she had a future worth fighting for. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks after the trial, which gave the scandal sheets exactly enough time to work themselves into a frenzy. Headlines screamed from every corner: disgraced daughter to wed conspiracy duke and Blackmore's folly, noble line tainted by murderer's blood. And Lena's personal favorite, atmospheric alliance, when weather science meets social suicide. She read them over breakfast at Blackmore Hall, while Mrs. Graves muttered darkly about the intelligence of journalists, and Rowan pretended not to notice the papers at all. "You could sue for libel," he said, not looking up from his atmospheric readings. "Some of these claims are demonstrably false." "Which ones?" Lena turned a page. "The parts about me being a social climber, or the parts about you being delusional?" "Both, technically." "Then we'd spend the next decade in court instead of doing actual work." She set the paper down. "Let them write what they want. We know the truth." Rowan finally looked up, his gray eyes warm. "When did you become so pragmatic?" "When I realized caring about their opinions gives them power over me." Lena stood, crossing to the window. Beyond the glass, storm clouds were building over the moors, dark and heavy, but natural, beautiful, even. "They can call me whatever they want. I'm marrying you anyway." Scandalous. Absolutely. The truth was, Lena had spent 3 weeks bracing for the backlash that never quite came. Yes, the papers were vicious. Yes, her aunt had received calls from former friends suggesting Lena had trapped the Duke through manipulation. Yes, there were whispers everywhere she went, but there were also letters, dozens of them, then hundreds. They came from across the region, from parents whose children had been saved by Dr. Webb's treatments after he was freed, from farmers whose lands had been tested and cleared of contamination, from physicians who'd read her father's research and wanted to continue his work. And they all said essentially the same thing: "Thank you for refusing to stay silent. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to hide. Thank you for proving that the truth matters." One letter in particular had made Lena cry. It was from the mother of one of the 7 children who died from her father's poisoned medicine. "My son was 6 years old when he died. For 3 years I hated your father. I hated you. I wanted you to suffer the way I suffered. But now I know the truth. Your father didn't kill my boy. He was murdered too, just slower. I can't give you back the years I spent hating you, but I can give you this: forgiveness. And gratitude for making sure no other mother loses a child to these monsters." Lena had framed that letter and hung it in her room, where she could see it every morning when she woke. Now, watching the storm roll in, she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, exactly. She'd lost too much for peace. But purpose, direction, a future. "The atmospheric instruments are ready," Rowan said, coming to stand beside her. "If you want to test your father's theories about pressure changes affecting medicinal compounds, today's storm would be perfect." Lena turned to him. "You're asking if I want to go storm chasing 3 days before our wedding?" "I'm asking if you want to continue the work your father started. But yes, it does involve standing in a storm." His mouth quirked. "Consider it practice for married life." She kissed him, quick and fierce. "Let's go, monk." They took readings for 6 hours, moving across the estate as the storm intensified. Lena collected plant samples at different pressure points while Rowan documented atmospheric conditions with instruments that looked like they belonged in a laboratory rather than the middle of a windswept moor. The data was fascinating. Her father had been right. Atmospheric pressure directly affected the chemical composition of certain medicinal plants. Under normal conditions, willow bark produced compounds that reduced fever and pain. But when pressure dropped below a certain threshold, the same plant produced compounds that could cause heart palpitations and dizziness. "This is revolutionary," Rowan said, examining the samples. "If physicians understand how weather affects medicine, they can adjust dosages based on atmospheric conditions, prevent accidental poisoning, save lives." "My father would have loved this," Lena said quietly. "He spent years trying to prove the connection, but he never had enough data. He has it now, through you." It should have felt like victory. In many ways, it was. But Lena couldn't shake the thought that her father should have been the one making these discoveries, that he should have lived to see his theories validated. As if reading her mind, Rowan said, He'd be proud of you. Not just for continuing his work, for surviving what they did to him, to you. You didn't know him. No, but I know you, and you're your father's daughter in every way that matters. The words broke something open in Lena's chest, something that had been locked tight since the day her father died. She let herself cry there on the moor, with rain streaming down her face and wind howling around them, while Rowan held her and said nothing at all. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were swollen but clear. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not letting me disappear, for making me fight. You made yourself fight. I just gave you a reason to believe you could win." They finished collecting samples as the storm began to break, working in companionable silence. By the time they returned to the hall, both were soaked and shivering, but Lena felt more alive than she had in years. Mrs. Graves met them at the door with towels and hot tea, and a look that suggested they were both idiots. 3 days before your wedding," she said, "and you're gallivanting around in lightning storms. What would people say?" "That we're perfectly suited," Rowan replied, accepting his tea. "Thank you, Mrs. Graves." She sniffed, but didn't argue. That evening, as Lena sorted through her father's journals in the study, someone knocked. She looked up to find Dr. Marcus Webb standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Dr. Webb, I didn't know you were in the area. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you before the wedding." He stepped inside, looking older than he had at the trial, but healthier, less hollow. "To thank you properly." "You already thanked me. In writing. Extensively. Written thanks aren't enough for what you did. You saved my life, Sarah's life, Thomas Kirby's life. You risked everything to prove we were innocent." "I was proving my father was innocent too. We helped each other." Webb smiled slightly. "Always deflecting credit. You're just like him, you know, your father. He never wanted recognition either, just wanted to do the work." "Did you know him well?" "Not as well as I should have. We met 3 times at medical conferences. The last time was 6 months before the children died. He presented preliminary findings on atmospheric effects. The other physicians laughed at him, called it pseudoscience." Webb's expression darkened. "I should have defended him, should have taken his research seriously. Maybe if I had, I would have recognized what was happening to my own patients before it was too late. You couldn't have known. Neither could your father, but we both carried guilt for it anyway." He set something on the table, a leather-bound journal, newer than her father's, but similar in style. "I've been documenting everything we discussed at the trial. The atmospheric manipulation, the chemical interactions, the patterns. I want you to have it, to add to your father's research." Lena picked up the journal carefully. Inside were detailed notes, chemical formulas, observations that would take months to fully process. Webb, this is invaluable. It's a foundation for the work we're going to continue." He met her eyes. "I've been offered a position at Harmont Medical College. Teaching position. They want me to develop a curriculum on environmental factors in medicine. I'd like to use your father's research as the basis. With your permission, of course." Lena's throat tightened. He would have loved that. "Then I have your permission? On one condition. You credit him. Fully. Dr. Jonathan Whitaker, pioneer of atmospheric medicine. Make sure everyone knows his name and what he discovered." "I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise." Webb offered his hand. "Thank you, Miss Whitaker, for everything." She took his hand, feeling the weight of 3 years finally beginning to lift. "Thank you for surviving, for continuing the fight." After Webb left, Lena sat alone in the study, her father's journals spread before her alongside Webb's new contributions. This was his legacy. Not the scandal, not the deaths he'd been falsely blamed for, but the work, the discoveries, the lives that would be saved because he'd refused to give up on a theory everyone else dismissed. She'd make sure the world knew. Not through anger or vengeance, but through evidence, through continuing what he'd started, through living the kind of life he'd taught her to value, one built on truth, courage, and refusing to close your eyes when the world got hard. The wedding took place on a bright autumn morning with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Fitting, Lena thought, for 2 people who'd fallen in love while chasing weather patterns. They'd kept it small despite Rowan's title. Just immediate family, close friends, and a handful of colleagues from the atmospheric research community. No society darlings. No politicians trying to curry favor, just people who actually mattered. Aunt Miriam cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Graves pretended not to cry but fooled no one. Dr. Webb and Sarah Chen sat together, both looking uncomfortable in formal clothes, but genuinely happy. And Rowan stood at the altar in a simple black suit, watching Lena walk toward him with an expression that made her heart skip. The ceremony itself was brief. No elaborate vows or religious pageantry, just a straightforward exchange of promises witnessed by people who'd seen them at their worst and loved them anyway. "Do you, Lena Whitaker, take this man?" "I do," Lena said before the officiant could finish. "Sorry. Yes, I do." Laughter rippled through the small gathering. Rowan's smile was brilliant. "Eager?" "Impatient. There's a difference." "And do you, Rowan Blackmore, take this woman?" "I do. Absolutely. Without question." He looked at Lena. "For however long she'll put up with me." "That's not traditional phrasing, Your Grace." "Nothing about this is traditional." Rowan took Lena's hands. "Which is exactly how it should be." The officiant sighed but continued. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you married. You may—" Rowan kissed her before that sentence finished, too. Lena kissed him back, tasting laughter and relief and the promise of storms they'd face together instead of alone. When they pulled apart, the small crowd erupted in applause. "Scandalous," Mrs. Graves said loudly. "Absolutely scandalous." But she was smiling. The reception was held in Blackmore Hall's great room, which had been transformed with wildflowers and candles into something that looked almost magical. There were speeches, Webb giving a touching tribute to Lena's father, Aunt Miriam embarrassing Lena with childhood stories, Rowan's cousin making jokes about atmospheric obsession. But the moment that mattered most came later, when the formalities had ended and most guests had retired for the evening. Lena stood on the hall's terrace, watching lightning dance across the distant hills. The storm was coming, a big one, judging by the way the air tasted of ozone and electricity. Rowan found her there, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Hiding from your own wedding reception?" he asked, offering her a glass. "Breathing. It's been a long day. It's been a long year." "Try 3 years." Rowan leaned against the terrace railing beside her. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Lena considered the question seriously. "I regret that my father died believing he was a murderer. I regret that 7 children lost their lives. I regret that it took so long to expose Harrow and Ashford." She paused. "But do I regret fighting back? Refusing to disappear? Meeting you?" She looked at him. "Not for a second." "Good. Because I have a proposition. We're already married. What else could you possibly propose?" "A clinic." Rowan turned to face her fully. "Here, on the estate, a place where we combine atmospheric research with medical treatment, where physicians can learn how weather affects medicine, where patients who can't afford city doctors can get care from someone who actually gives a damn." Lena's breath caught. "That would be expensive, controversial. The medical establishment would fight us every step." "Probably. But we fought worse." His eyes held hers. "Your father wanted to help people. So do you. This is how we do it, not by asking permission, but by building something they can't ignore." It was crazy, ambitious, the kind of idea that would consume years of their lives and generate endless opposition. Lena loved it. "We'd need staff, equipment, supplies. We have funding. My estate generates enough income to support it, and I've already started converting the East Wing into treatment rooms." "You started before even asking me?" "I know you, Lena. You were always going to say yes." He was right. She was. "Then I guess we're opening a clinic." Rowan's grin was fierce and bright. "Partners?" "Always." They sealed it with a kiss as the first raindrops began to fall. The Blackmore Atmospheric Medical Clinic opened 6 months later on a cold spring morning that turned warm by afternoon, a meteorological anomaly Rowan documented with obvious delight. The first patient was a farmer's daughter with a persistent cough that 3 city physicians had failed to cure. Lena examined her thoroughly, checked the atmospheric readings, adjusted the medicinal formula to account for the unusually high pressure, and sent her home with treatment that cleared the cough within a week. Word spread. By the end of the first month, they were seeing 20 patients a week. By the end of the first year, 50. People traveled from across the region, some desperate, some curious, all willing to try medicine that took weather into account when conventional treatments had failed them. Not everyone was supportive. The medical establishment in Harmont denounced them as quacks. Several prominent physicians published papers attacking atmospheric medicine as pseudoscience. The scandal sheets continued writing breathless articles about the weather witch and her conspiracy duke. Lena ignored them all. She was too busy saving lives. Sarah Chen joined them after completing advanced chemistry training, bringing expertise in compound analysis that elevated their research to new levels. Dr. Webb sent students, carefully selected ones who showed both brilliance and integrity. Mrs. Graves ran the clinic's day-to-day operations with terrifying efficiency. And Rowan built instruments, collected data, and proved over and over that atmospheric conditions directly affected medical outcomes in measurable, replicable ways. 3 years after the clinic opened, the Royal Medical Society, the same institution that had once laughed at Lena's father, published a formal retraction of their previous stance on atmospheric medicine. They invited Rowan and Lena to present their research at the annual conference. "You should go," Sarah said when Lena hesitated. "Show them what you've built, what your father started." "They don't deserve to hear it." "Maybe not, but the patients who will benefit from physicians finally taking this seriously, they deserve it." Sarah was right. So Lena and Rowan traveled to Harmont, bringing 3 years of data, hundreds of case studies, and enough evidence to silence even the most skeptical critics. The presentation hall was packed. Every seat filled, physicians standing along the walls, journalists crowding the press gallery. Lena recognized several faces from the trial, some hostile, some curious, all watching with predatory attention. Her hands trembled as she took the podium. The old fear tried to rise, the instinct to make herself small, to disappear, to close her eyes against judgment. But she looked at Rowan standing in the front row, his expression steady and proud. She thought about her father's journals, about 7 dead children, about 3 years of fighting when it would have been easier to hide. And she began to speak. "My name is Lena Blackmore. 3 years ago, I was the disgraced daughter of a physician accused of murdering 7 children through negligence. Today, I'm the director of the Blackmore Atmospheric Medical Clinic, where we've successfully treated over 2,000 patients using principles my father pioneered before his death." The room erupted in whispers. Lena didn't pause. "My father, Dr. Jonathan Whitaker, dedicated his life to understanding how atmospheric conditions affect medicinal compounds. He was ridiculed by this institution, dismissed as a pseudoscientist, and ultimately destroyed by people who saw his research as a threat." She gripped the podium. "But he was right. And today, I'm going to prove it." She presented data. Charts showing correlation between atmospheric pressure and drug efficacy. Case studies of patients who'd failed conventional treatment but recovered when medicine was adjusted for weather conditions. Chemical analysis demonstrating how compounds changed under different atmospheric states. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. When she finished, the hall was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Physicians who'd seen the data and couldn't deny it, researchers who'd suspected similar connections, medical students who recognized breakthrough work when they saw it. The other half sat in stony silence, but Lena didn't care. She'd proven her father right, in front of the institution that had destroyed him. That was enough. After the presentation, physicians crowded around with questions. Some were hostile, challenging her methodology, demanding additional proof, insisting the correlations were coincidental. But others were genuinely interested, wanted to learn, wanted to incorporate atmospheric considerations into their own practices. One elderly physician in particular stood out. He waited until the crowd had thinned, then approached with careful dignity. "Dr. Blackmore, I'm Dr. Henry Carlisle. I was one of the physicians who dismissed your father's research 8 years ago at the medical conference where he presented his preliminary findings." Lena's shoulders tensed. "I remember. He mentioned it in his journals. I owe you an apology. More importantly, I owe him one, though I can't deliver it personally." Carlyle's eyes were sad. "I was wrong. We all were. And our arrogance cost lives. I can't change that, but I can try to do better going forward." He paused. "I'd like to visit your clinic, learn your methods, and perhaps help train other physicians so your father's work reaches as many people as possible." It should have felt like vindication. And it did, but it also felt like grief. For the years her father could have had, for the recognition he deserved while alive. He would have liked that, Lena said quietly. You're welcome at the clinic any time. 5 years after the wedding, Lena stood in the clinic's treatment room with her hands pressed against a window, watching storm clouds gather over the moors. The atmospheric instruments were already tracking pressure changes, wind patterns, precipitation forecasts. Behind her, 3 physicians in training were preparing medicine using the protocols she and Rowan had developed. Sarah was in the laboratory, analyzing new compounds. Mrs. Graves was arguing with a supply vendor about the quality of bandages. Everything hummed with purpose. The door opened and Rowan entered, carrying a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Their daughter, 3 months old with dark hair and eyes that might turn gray like her father's, made a small sound of protest at being moved. She's hungry, Rowan said, passing the baby to Lena. And I'm out of my depth. Lena took their daughter carefully, still amazed that this tiny person existed, that she and Rowan had created life instead of just documenting death. Did you finish the atmospheric readings? She asked, settling into a chair to nurse. Pressure's dropping faster than predicted. We'll need to adjust the medicinal formulas for tonight's patients. Already done. Sarah handled it an hour ago. Efficient. We've had practice. Rowan pulled up a chair beside her, watching their daughter nurse with an expression of absolute wonder. Sometimes I can't believe this is real. That we went from chasing conspiracies and abandoned mines to running a successful clinic and raising a child. A legitimate clinic, thank you. We have royal accreditation now, which the scandal sheets still insist we obtained through manipulation and dark weather magic. Obviously. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind pick up outside. After a moment, Rowan said, Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd run that night at the garden party? If you'd let the panic take you instead of accepting my partnership? Lena considered it. I think about my father, about how he spent his last months carrying guilt that didn't belong to him, how he died believing he'd failed. She looked down at their daughter. If I'd run, I'd have lived the same way. Hiding, shrinking, letting them define me by their lies. And instead I fought. I proved them wrong. I built something that matters. She met his eyes. I chose this life. The hard one. The one where people still whisper when I walk into a room, where every medical journal article gets extra scrutiny because of my name, where I have to prove myself over and over. Do you regret it? Never. She reached for his hand. Because this life, the storms, the clinic, the research, you, our daughter, this is real. It's mine. No one can take it from me because I built it with my own hands. Rowan kissed her forehead. Your father would be so proud. I hope so. Lena looked out the window at the gathering storm. I think he would have loved this. Teaching new physicians. Seeing his research used to save lives. Watching atmospheric medicine become legitimate. He'd have loved meeting his granddaughter. He'd have taught her to grind medicinal compounds before she could walk. She's going to be unstoppable. Their daughter finished nursing and promptly fell asleep, tiny fists curled against Lena's chest. Rowan took her carefully, holding her like she was made of glass, despite having done this hundreds of times already. What should we tell her? He asked quietly. When she's old enough to understand. About the trial, the murders, the scandal. Lena stood, crossing to the window. The storm was close now. She could smell the rain coming, feel the pressure change in her bones. We tell her the truth, that her grandfather was a brilliant physician who was destroyed by people who feared what he knew, that her grandmother. She stopped, realizing she was talking about herself in the third person, projecting forward to a time when she'd be the one remembered in stories. That we fought back, that we refused to let lies define us, that we built something good from something terrible. And when people whisper about her family history, we teach her what you taught me. Lena turned to face him. That the world is harsh, but hiding from it won't save you. That the only way through is through. That sometimes you have to stand in the storm with your eyes wide open and refuse to blink until everyone else sees what you see. Rowan smiled, that fierce, bright smile that had pulled her from darkness years ago. She's going to be terrifying. Good. The world could use more terrifying women. The storm broke then, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling around the hall's stone walls, lightning illuminating the moors in violent bursts. Lena didn't flinch, didn't close her eyes, didn't feel even a flicker of the old panic that used to consume her. She just stood there with her husband and daughter, watching nature's fury with the calm of someone who'd learned to read its patterns, to work with it instead of against it, to find beauty in the chaos. "Another storm," Rowan said. "Think we should take readings?" In a minute, Lena moved to stand beside him, looking down at their sleeping daughter. "First, let's just watch it, together." So they did. They stood at the window while rain pounded the glass and wind rattled the shutters, and the storm raged across the moors with all the violence and beauty nature could muster. And Lena Blackmore, physician, researcher, wife, mother, survivor, kept her eyes open. She'd learned that lesson well. The world could be harsh and cruel and absolutely merciless. People could destroy you with lies, frame you for crimes you didn't commit, try to bury you so deep you'd never claw your way back to light. But if you refused to disappear, if you stood your ground when it would be easier to run, if you kept your eyes open even when closing them felt safer, if you did all that, the world had to make room for you. It had to acknowledge you existed. And eventually, if you built something strong enough and true enough and worth defending, it had to let you live. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain gentled from a torrent to a steady patter. The wind dropped from a howl to a whisper. And through the breaking clouds, late afternoon sun streamed across the moors in golden shafts that looked almost like blessing, almost like hope. "Beautiful," Rowan murmured. Lena leaned into him, her hand finding his. "Yes, it is. And for the first time in 5 years, maybe for the first time since her father died, Lena felt something that might have been peace. Not because the fight was over. There would always be another battle, another scandal, another storm to weather, but because she'd learned how to stand in the chaos without breaking, because she'd proven that truth could survive even when lies had all the power, because she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something that mattered. Her father's legacy wasn't the scandal, it was the clinic, the research, the thousands of lives saved by physicians who finally understood that weather and medicine were connected. And her legacy, her daughter's legacy, would be the same. Not defined by what others said about them, but by what they built with their own hands. That evening, as Lena prepared for rounds and Rowan put their daughter to bed, a rider arrived from Harmont. He carried a sealed letter with the royal crest. Lena opened it at the dinner table, Rowan reading over her shoulder. "Dr. Lena Blackmore, in recognition of your contributions to medical science and your establishment of the Blackmore Atmospheric Medical Clinic, the Crown hereby awards you the Royal Medal for Medical Innovation. The ceremony will take place at the palace in 6 weeks. Your presence is requested along with that of the Duke of Blackmore. Additionally, we wish to discuss the establishment of atmospheric medicine as a formal discipline within royal medical institutions. Your expertise would be invaluable in developing curriculum and training protocols. Yours in service to the realm, Her Majesty." Queen Eleanor Lena set the letter down carefully. "A royal medal," Rowan said. "For the disgraced daughter everyone said would amount to nothing. For the physician who refused to stay silent." Same thing. Lena looked at her husband, this impossible man who'd pulled her from darkness and taught her to fight, who'd stood beside her through trials and storms and scandal. "Are we going?" she asked. "Do you want to?" "I want everyone who said my father was a murderer to watch the Crown honor his daughter for continuing his work. I want Constance Ashford's family to see what happens when you try to bury the truth." Her eyes hardened. "I want them to know they failed." Rowan's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Then we're going." 6 weeks later, Lena stood in the palace throne room wearing a gown of deep blue that Aunt Miriam had insisted was appropriate for the occasion. Beside her, Rowan wore formal dress with his ducal insignia, looking every inch the aristocrat despite his complete disregard for social convention. The ceremony was elaborate, full of pageantry and tradition that made Lena's teeth ache. But when the queen herself placed the medal around Lena's neck and said, "Your father's research has saved countless lives through your dedication. The realm is grateful," Lena felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief this time. Recognition. Her father's work, their work, mattered. The world had finally acknowledged it. After the ceremony, as they walked through the palace gardens, Rowan said, "How does it feel? Being officially recognized as a medical innovator instead of a scandal? Strange. Good. Like I can finally breathe without waiting for the next attack. There will be more attacks, people who still believe the lies, who resent your success. Let them come." Lena's hand found the medal at her throat. "I'm not afraid anymore." And she wasn't. The fear that had defined her for so long, the panic that made her want to disappear, to close her eyes, to make herself small enough that the world couldn't hurt her, was gone. Not because the world had changed, it was still harsh and often cruel, but because she had changed. She'd learned to stand in storms without breaking, to face truth even when lies were easier, to build something worth defending instead of just surviving. That evening, back at Blackmore Hall, Lena wrote a letter to the families of the 7 children who died. "I cannot give you back what was taken. I cannot undo the grief you've carried. But I can tell you that your children's deaths were not in vain. Because of what happened to them, atmospheric medicine is now recognized as a legitimate discipline. Physicians across the realm are learning to adjust treatments based on weather conditions. Hundreds of lives have been saved. Thousands more will be. Your children deserve better than to become casualties in someone else's experiment. My father deserved better than to die carrying guilt for their murders. But from that tragedy, we built something good, something that honors their memory by ensuring no other children die the same way. I hope that brings you some measure of peace. It will never be enough. But it's all I can offer. With deepest respect and sorrow, Dr. Lena Blackmore." She sent copies to all 7 families, not knowing if they'd read them or burn them or simply throw them away. 3 weeks later, one replied, "Dr. Blackmore, thank you for your letter. Thank you for refusing to let their deaths be meaningless. And thank you for proving that truth, no matter how long it takes, eventually prevails. My daughter would have been 10 years old now. I like to think she would have been proud of what you've accomplished." With gratitude, Margaret Sutton Lena framed that letter too, hung it beside the first one, creating a small gallery of forgiveness and recognition in her study. Years passed. The clinic expanded. More physicians trained in atmospheric medicine, more lives saved, more research published. Their daughter grew, fierce and curious and absolutely fearless, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. And Lena continued the work, every day, through storms and sunshine and everything between. Because that was the real victory. Not the trial, not the royal recognition, not even the vindication of her father's research. The victory was choosing, every single day, to keep her eyes open, to face the world as it was, harsh and beautiful and absolutely unforgiving, and build something worth defending anyway. To refuse to disappear no matter how many people wanted her gone. To stand in the storm and say, "I survived, I fought back, and I'm still here." That was the lesson she'd teach her daughter, the legacy she'd leave behind. Not that the world was kind, it wasn't, but that you could survive its cruelty and come out stronger. That truth, no matter how buried, eventually found light. That love, the fierce, stubborn kind that refused to let you break, was worth every fight. And that sometimes, the woman everyone said would amount to nothing could change the world. One storm at a time, with her eyes wide open, always.